So, hey guys, welcome to the second part of maybe our discussion about the sunflower. I know that you guys are going to be receiving sort of a lecture from Miss Welch, kind of comparing the sunflower to night. I haven't actually considered that before because it's kind of my first time thinking about night, so I'm really excited to. I'm personally want to watch Miss Welch's lecture because I'm kind of really curious on her thoughts on that matter. We haven't really talked about it, but I know that she just had a lot of cool ideas about it, so I'm really interested in that. I'm here talking today about the sunflower and kind of talking about the symbolism in it. So we'll kind of get to that in just a second. So I guess we'll kind of get into it. So when it comes to thinking about the sunflower, first and foremost, we have to remember that it's a memoir. And so if you guys, those of you who read a memoir for your book club back in first quarter, you'll just remember that kind of a memoir tells truth, but at the same time, just for the sake of narrative storytelling, it does make some creative licenses. So we've gotten this example. I want to say it's 15 examples of. Is it 15? Yeah, 15 examples of a sunflower being mentioned in it. 14. And so I think the first thing we just have to kind of air out right now is that it's very likely that Simon Wiesenthal, that probably was a sunflower, but I mean, he probably wasn't thinking about it as intently as he was in the time period. He probably really was intentional about incorporating that symbol in this text after he experienced the Holocaust. So that's just kind of want to get that out there. Now, with that said, by very factor that he is writing in his own narrative and kind of adding in sort of these narrative elements, I don't think it undermines his work at all. In fact, I think it's meant to enhance it. So what he's doing is he's adding some figurative elements to kind of further kind of address his purpose. And so we need to think about really two things. One, why is this called the sunflower? And two, what is a sunflower maybe a symbol of? And so I think let's start off by first just talking about what a sunflower in general symbolizes. So if we were kind of thinking about a sunflower in the collective universe of symbolism, like sort of the collective universe, it'd be appropriate to think of a sunflower as probably a symbol of friendship, a symbol of harvest, a symbol of growth, right? These are maybe just typical family typical flower associations, right? You probably got symbols. Well, the sun, right? It's called the sunflower, so like the sun. So life and new beginnings and brightness and dawn, etc. So you've got kind of those components inside of it. And so so those are maybe some considerations. I think though in the case of this text, I think it's meant to represent something different and something a bit more complicated and nuanced. And I think that it is fair to say that the sunflower carries multiple meanings. So I don't think it's fair to say there's a singular meaning, because I think that if we were to apply a definition of what the sunflower was a symbol of, I don't think it fits all 14 times. And so I just kind of want us to maybe think about that. I think that by the fact that it's called the sunflower on the possibilities and limits of forgiveness, I think we are forced to think of this sunflower as a symbol of forgiveness. I think is maybe one kind of opening thought. But I want to kind of pull out some passages and we'll kind of talk about those and see how that kind of maybe pans out, maybe see if we can nuance it a bit more. So we've got the first example found on page 14. And and I'll just kind of read a little bit before behind. So it says, each of us was carrying around his own death certificate from which only the date was missing. Our column suddenly came, this is on page 14, our column suddenly came to a halt at a crossroads. I could see nothing that might be holding us up, but I noticed on the left of the street there was a military cemetery. It was enclosed by a low barbed wire fence. The wires were threaded through sparse bushes and low shrubs, but between them you could see the graves aligned in stiff rows, and on each grave there was planted a sunflower as straight as a soldier on parade. I stared, spellbound. The flower heads seemed to absorb the sun's rays like mirrors and draw them down into the darkness of the ground as my gaze wandered from the sunflower to the grave. It seemed to penetrate the earth, and suddenly I saw before me a periscope. It was gaily colored, and butterflies fluttered from flower to flower. Were they carrying messages from grave to grave? Were they whispering something to each other to pass on to the soldier below? Yes, this was what they were doing. The dead were receiving light and messages. Suddenly, I envied the dead soldiers. Each had a sunflower to connect him with the living world, and butterflies to visit his grave. For me, there would be no sunflower. I would be buried in a mass grave, or corpses would be piled on top of me. No sunflower would ever bring light into my darkness, and no butterflies would dance above my dreadful tomb. So that's kind of the first section. Pops up a few more times. He sees a lot of images when he's talking to Carl, and he feels that Carl is holding a sunflower kind of as he's resting his fingers. So you've kind of got that component of it. Later he sort of thinks a lot about the fact that these soldiers are going to have a mark that represents them, right? And so I think that's where we want to start. Maybe that's going to probably drive most of our thoughts here. I'm not going to cover all 14, and I don't think it's appropriate. I think you should, though, think about, beyond just the one that I'm kind of focusing in on here. So, in that passage that I just read, it's the literal tone, right? The literal section here is that the sunflowers are markers of a gravestone, right? And graves for the dead Nazi soldiers. So that's kind of the literal part here. But what seems to be driving Wiesenthal is the fact that it penetrates the earth, and that there is a periscope, and that they are carrying messages from grave to grave. And so what it seems like here is that he's really reflecting on the fact that these are markers and representations of life that has lived and life that gets memorialized. And he is struck, right, that he would be buried in a mass grave where corpses would be piled on top of me. So there's a level of collectivism that he seems to be wrestling with, and this idea of being kind of amassed and kind of being forgotten as sort of as a statistic, or maybe as this wath, instead of being individualized. And so I think that the sunflower seems to represent sort of individuality being represented for each soldier, right? Each one gets their own sunflower, so they're kind of marked as unique, and they get to be marked as individuals, whereas he is going to be considered collective. And I think that fits really well in this Holocaust narrative, right? Because these Jewish people were just rounded up just because of the fact that they were Jewish and not because they had committed a crime. And so then you've got that kind of connection kind of going on about sort of feeling erased, right? Erasure is kind of a term that I've been using a lot with my sophomores, so hopefully, I don't know, so that's just the idea, like, right, this act of being erased. And so they're also just being dehumanized, and so I think there's even a layer of that being represented here. And so I guess maybe the other thing that the sunflower could represent is not only life or identity, but I think it's also representative of humanity, It says in the last part, right, no sunflower would ever bring light into my darkness, and no butterflies would dance above my dreadful tomb. And so there is something that's very humanizing that the sunflower offers, and that it is a representation of the humanity of that Simon is yearning for. He's yearning to be recognized as human. And so maybe that idea of humanity maybe extends further in the text. I'm just looking right now at page 58. It says, thoughts of tomorrow made me think of the dying SS man with the bandaged head. Tomorrow, or perhaps the day after tomorrow, he would get his sunflower. For me, tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, perhaps a mass grave waited. Indeed, at any moment, the order might come to clear the hut in which I and my comrades slept, or I might be one of the 10 to be selected as a deterrent. And so I think that maybe the representation here is that he is thinking about sort of even the humanity that Carl is going to receive, and maybe I think later, like, again, there's a passage that I don't have pulled up, is that when he's thinking about, like, he's seeing, like, Simon sitting like this, and he sees a sunflower kind of emerging from that. And so I think he's being reminded of Simon's humanity, even though he is confronted with the very inhumane acts that Simon's committed. And so that's maybe a thought there. So I hope you're enjoying bonsai eating leaves as much as I'm enjoying it. So sorry, I think it distracted me. Hey, Bubbish. Good boy. Anyway, that's my dog Bonsai, for those who don't know. Anyway, so I guess the thought here is that the symbol of the sunflower maybe at best represents humanity, or maybe represents memory. So maybe those are my two kind of thoughts on what it represents, as well as identity. So I guess, okay, so three. I really want to see maybe you guys kind of apply sort of that knowledge to maybe other parts where we see the sunflower, and see if you can kind of develop an understanding of it, or maybe even develop kind of a more nuanced approach, because I try to keep it pretty simplistic for you, but I want you to maybe think about that some more. I guess the other kind of maybe final anecdote. So Simon Wiesel, I want to say he died in 2008, maybe 2013. I can't remember exactly when he died, but when he died, where he's buried at there, and I think it's just kind of beautiful, is that his particular grave flower is always a sunflower, and so he's the supporters of him, people who remember him, etc. They always leave batches of sunflowers for him. So I just thought it was kind of very fitting that in this memoir he was reflecting, and he felt that there was no sunflower for him, and that he would be forgotten and left alone, and that in death he is memorialized with the sunflower. So I think there's something beautiful about that. Okay, so I guess that's kind of it for that discussion, or I guess lecture. Again, I think that you guys ought to look at maybe other passages. Again, there's 14, 15 if you include the title itself, and maybe consider maybe how the symbol and maybe what I've talked about is maybe fleshed out, and maybe how you can develop that and nuance it, maybe add some more layers of development to it by looking at the other examples. So thanks. Enjoy yourselves, guys. Have a good one. Bye.